So today I want to talk about what I believe is the single most important question surrounding this entire war. Not who is winning, not how many strikes have been launched, not what Donald Trump said yesterday, or what Iran threatened today. None of that is the real issue. The real question is this: can America actually stop this war? Can it negotiate a ceasefire? Can it withdraw? Can it find a way out? And when you look closely, when you really break it down step by step, the answer becomes deeply unsettling. America is trapped. It's stuck in a position where it cannot move forward, and it cannot move back. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly why that is, in simple, clear terms. So let's begin. Part 1. The war has its own momentum. The first thing you need to understand is this: once a war like this begins, it takes on a life of its own. It develops its own momentum, its own internal logic. At that point, the war is no longer something controlled by politicians or generals. Instead, it starts controlling them. Think about the war in Ukraine. It began in February 2022, and from the very beginning, both sides understood something important. A negotiated settlement was possible. They knew continuing the war would bring enormous damage, massive human suffering, economic destruction on both sides. And yet years later the war continues. Why? Because stopping a war requires something extremely difficult. It requires one side to accept loss, to accept humiliation, to agree to terms that feel unbearable. And most governments, most leaders simply cannot do that. That same pattern is now repeating itself here. This war involving Iran will follow that exact trajectory. Neither side will willingly concede defeat, even when it becomes clear that continuing is no longer in their best interest. And that means this conflict could drag on for years. This isn't speculation. It's a pattern we've seen over and over again throughout history. But here's what makes this situation even more dangerous than Ukraine. Even if America wanted to stop, it can't. Part 2. The ceasefire trap. Let's imagine a scenario. America decides today, enough is enough. It wants a ceasefire. So it reaches out quietly, maybe through intermediaries like Oman or Qatar. Back-channel diplomacy begins. Let's talk. Iran responds, fine, we're willing to stop. But then come the terms. First, America pays roughly $1 trillion in reparations, compensation for destruction, decades of sanctions, and economic damage inflicted on the Iranian people. Second, and this is the critical point, America must permanently leave the Middle East, close its bases, withdraw all forces, remove its military presence entirely. From Iran's perspective, the logic is simple. If America can't come back, it can't repeat this conflict. Now, on the surface, some might think, maybe that's acceptable. Maybe America should leave the region anyway. But that thinking misses something crucial. The moment America leaves, a chain reaction begins, and that chain reaction would be catastrophic. Step 1. The GCC falls under Iran's influence. Right now, countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar rely heavily on American military protection. That protection allows them to function as independent states. Remove it, and everything changes. The only regional power capable of filling that vacuum is Iran, so these nations would have no real choice. They would shift toward Iran's sphere of influence, not necessarily by desire, but by necessity. Step 2. The petrodollar collapses. This is where things become extremely serious. These Gulf nations are not just oil-rich states. They are the foundation of the petrodollar system. Oil is sold in US dollars. That means every country that needs energy must hold dollars. That creates constant global demand for the US currency. Then those dollars flow back into the American economy through investments, bonds, and financial markets. This system is what allows America to sustain massive debt, currently around $39 trillion. But if the Gulf states shift toward Iran, that system breaks. Oil may no longer be priced in dollars. Capital stops flowing back into the US. Global demand for dollars declines sharply, and suddenly, the foundation of American financial power begins to collapse. Step 3. Asia reconsiders its security. Now look at Japan and South Korea. They are watching everything closely. They're asking a difficult question. If America struggles against Iran, can it really protect us against China or North Korea? And if America withdraws from the Middle East, that doubt becomes even stronger. So what happens? They begin to rely less on the US and more on themselves. Japan accelerates its military expansion, something already underway. South Korea strengthens its own capabilities, and that means fewer resources flowing into American defense systems, less reliance on US military infrastructure. Another strategic and economic blow. Step 4. Europe recalculates. Now shift to Europe. Right now, European nations are heavily invested in supporting Ukraine against Russia, despite high economic costs. But if America withdraws from the Middle East, Europe will draw a clear conclusion. America is retreating, and if that's the case, why should Europe continue bearing the burden of prolonged conflict? At that point, negotiating peace with Russia becomes far more attractive. And once that happens, the Western alliance begins to fracture. Institutions like NATO lose cohesion. America's influence in Europe weakens significantly. Step 5. The dollar loses its global status. Now put everything together. The petrodollar weakens. Asia becomes more independent. Europe pulls back. What happens next? The US dollar begins to lose its status as the world's reserve currency. Countries stop holding dollars, stop buying US debt, stop reinvesting into American markets. And with $39 trillion in debt, that creates a massive problem. The entire system begins to break down. So this is the trap. Staying in the war is incredibly costly. But leaving? Leaving could trigger consequences even worse. America is stuck. It doesn't have good options, only difficult ones, and even worse ones. Part 3. The ground invasion trap. So if America cannot negotiate a ceasefire, and it cannot withdraw, then what happens next? Pressure builds, pressure to escalate, pressure to act, pressure to demonstrate strength. And that's where the next danger appears, the ground invasion trap. Right now, there are discussions about deploying roughly 200 Marines from Okinawa into the Middle East. And there are rumors, again, just rumors, that the objective could be to seize Car Island. Now, let's understand why this matters. Car Island is not just any location. It is where Iran exports around 90% of its oil. 90%. That makes it Iran's economic lifeline, the core of its ability to sustain this war. So on the surface, the logic seems straightforward. If America takes Car Island, it cuts off Iran's revenue. It cripples Iran's ability to fund the war. It creates a powerful image of dominance. It would look decisive. It would look strong. It would boost morale back home. But here's the reality. You might be able to take Car Island, but you cannot hold it. Why? Because of geography. Car Island sits extremely close to the Iranian coastline. The moment American forces land there, they become an easy target. Iran can strike with artillery, with drones, with missiles. The island becomes a kill zone. So what happens next? To protect the Marines, America would need to secure the nearby coastline. But once you control the coastline, you face a new problem. Behind that coastline lie the Zagros Mountains. And from those mountains, Iran can launch attacks downward onto any American positions. So now, to protect the coastline, America would need to take the mountains. And once you take the mountains, you are inside Iran. At that point, this is no longer a limited operation. It becomes a full-scale land war inside one of the most difficult terrains on Earth. This is what we call mission creep. And history shows us exactly how this plays out. In 1965, America deployed about 3,000 Marines to Da Nang in Vietnam. It was supposed to be limited, controlled, temporary. 4 years later, that number had grown to over 500,000 troops, from 3,000 to 500,000. Why does this happen? Because once you commit, leaving becomes psychologically and politically impossible. Leaving means admitting defeat, and that's where the sunk cost fallacy takes over. You've already lost lives. You've already spent resources. You've already invested too much, so you keep going. Not because it makes sense, but because stopping feels unbearable. America has seen this pattern before, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and now it risks repeating it again. Part 4. Why America is actually losing this war. Now I want to explain something that most mainstream coverage is not emphasizing enough. The American military does not want this war, and it's not because of a lack of strength or capability. It's because of what happens in simulations. Over and over again, military planners run war games, testing scenarios, modeling outcomes, analyzing every possible angle. And in those simulations, one result keeps repeating. America loses. Let that sink in. Every time a full-scale conflict with Iran is simulated, the outcome is unfavorable. Why? Because the American military is designed for a very specific type of warfare. It excels at shock and awe, overwhelming air superiority, precision strikes, rapid dominance. We saw this in Iraq in 2003. Within days, the US achieved air supremacy. Within weeks, it reached Baghdad. Within a month, the regime had collapsed. Fast, decisive, clean. But Iran is not Iraq. Iran has spent more than 20 years studying how America fights. Every war, every tactic, every strength, and every weakness. And instead of fighting America directly, Iran has built a strategy specifically designed to counter it. It disperses its forces. It hides key infrastructure. It relies on asymmetric warfare, drones, missiles, underground facilities, and proxy networks across the region. Everything is designed to neutralize America's advantages. And nowhere is this more visible than at sea. Take the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier and the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier. These are among the most powerful warships ever built. Each one carries immense firepower, enough to devastate entire regions. They are symbols of American military dominance. And yet, they are operating at a distance. They posture, they project power, but they stay far from Iran's coastline. Why? Because getting too close means entering the range of Iranian drones and hypersonic missiles. And despite their power, these carriers are also massive targets. Losing even one would be catastrophic, not just militarily but psychologically. So they stay back, and Iran knows it. Iran has prepared for this exact situation for decades. It understands the American playbook, sometimes better than the people using it, and it has built the perfect counter. Part 5. What should America actually do? So now we arrive at the most important question. If America cannot stop the war, cannot withdraw, cannot win cleanly, and risks falling into a ground invasion trap, what should it do? The honest answer requires stepping back, because this war is not happening in isolation. It is connected to everything else happening in the world. Tensions with China, the war in Ukraine, conflicts across multiple regions. These are not separate events. They are all symptoms of a larger issue. American power is overstretched. It is involved everywhere, every region, every conflict, every dispute. And that creates vulnerability, because when you are everywhere, your adversaries can pull you in multiple directions at once. They can drain your resources, weaken your influence, stretch your capabilities thin. That's exactly what is happening now. So what is the solution? It's not more escalation. It's not more control. It's a fundamental shift in strategy. Instead of trying to dominate every region, America needs to move toward cooperation. It needs to sit down with major powers, Russia, China, Iran, and acknowledge a simple reality. The old world order is changing. The era of a single dominant power is ending, and a new system is needed, one based not on domination but on balance, on mutual interests, on shared stability. In practical terms, that means reducing military overreach, reconsidering the use of economic pressure tools like sanctions, and building a system where all major powers have a stake in peace. Because when everyone has something to gain from stability, fewer people are willing to risk war. This is not weakness. It's strategic maturity. It's long-term thinking. And right now, it may be the only path that avoids a much larger catastrophe. So let's recap everything clearly. This war has its own momentum, just like Ukraine, and neither side can easily stop it. America cannot accept a ceasefire because Iran's terms would trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. GCC states shift toward Iran. The petrodollar weakens. Asia becomes more independent. Europe recalculates. The US dollar loses global dominance. At the same time, a ground invasion leads to mission creep, just like Vietnam. And militarily, simulations show that America struggles to win against Iran's strategy. So America is trapped. It cannot move forward. It cannot move back. And it cannot remain in place forever. The only real path forward is a shift toward cooperation, a new global balance. Whether that happens is still uncertain. But one thing is clear: the longer this continues, the more costly and more dangerous it becomes. Part 6. The deeper reality behind this war. Now, to truly understand what's happening, we need to go one level deeper. Because everything we've discussed so far, the ceasefire trap, the ground invasion trap, the economic chain reaction, those are all surface-level consequences. Underneath all of it lies a much bigger truth. This war is not just about Iran. It is about the structure of global power itself. For decades, the United States has operated as the central pillar of the global system. It has maintained military bases across the world, influenced international trade, controlled financial systems, and acted as the primary security guarantor for multiple regions. That system worked, especially after the end of the Cold War. But today, that system is under pressure like never before, because the world is no longer unipolar. Countries like China are rising economically and technologically. Nations like Russia are asserting themselves militarily. Regional powers like Iran are becoming more independent and more resilient. And instead of one dominant center of power, we now have multiple. This creates friction, because the old system still exists, but the new system is already emerging. And when those two realities collide, conflict becomes almost inevitable. That's what we are witnessing right now. The illusion of control. One of the most dangerous assumptions in this entire situation is the belief that America can still control outcomes the way it once did. But that assumption no longer holds, because modern conflicts are no longer linear. They are complex, interconnected, multi-layered. A decision in the Middle East affects Asia. A conflict in Europe affects global energy markets. Sanctions in one region ripple through financial systems worldwide. Everything is connected, and in a connected system, control becomes much harder. For example, when America applies pressure on Iran, it's not just Iran that responds. China adjusts its energy strategy. Russia recalibrates its geopolitical position. Regional alliances shift, so instead of isolating one problem, each action creates new ones. That's why this war feels so difficult to manage, because it is not one conflict, it is part of a network of conflicts. The strategic overstretch problem. There's another key issue here: overstretch. When a nation is involved in too many places at once, its ability to respond effectively decreases. Right now, the United States is engaged in strategic competition with China, ongoing support in Ukraine, military commitments across Asia, and now, direct conflict involving Iran. Each of these requires resources, attention, coordination, and resources are not infinite, even for a superpower. This is where the concept of strategic overstretch becomes critical, because when a system is overstretched, it becomes fragile. It may still look powerful on the surface, but underneath, it is strained. And that strain creates opportunities for others. Iran's asymmetric advantage. Now let's look again at Iran, but from a different perspective. Iran is not trying to match America in conventional strength. It doesn't need to. Instead, it focuses on asymmetry. It asks a different question. How do we make this war too costly for America to sustain? And the answer is not through direct confrontation. It's through distributed forces, proxy networks, economic disruption, strategic patience. Iran does not need to win quickly. It just needs to avoid losing. And over time, that changes the balance. Because the longer the conflict continues, the more pressure builds. Not just militarily, but politically and economically. This is something the United States has struggled with in previous conflicts. Long wars are difficult to sustain in a democratic system. Public opinion shifts, political pressure increases, economic costs accumulate, and eventually the question changes from, how do we win, to, is continuing worth it? The psychological battlefield. There's another dimension to this war that is often overlooked. The psychological dimension. Wars are not only fought with weapons, they are fought with perception, with narratives, with morale, with belief. If people believe a war is unwinnable, that belief itself becomes a factor. If allies begin to doubt, their behavior changes. If adversaries sense hesitation, they become more confident. Right now, perception is shifting, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. And in geopolitics, gradual shifts can have enormous long-term consequences. A system at a crossroads. So where does all of this leave us? At a crossroads. The current path leads to continued escalation. More pressure, more risk, more instability, and potentially a much larger conflict. The alternative path is much harder. It requires recognition. Recognition that the world is changing. Recognition that no single nation can dominate indefinitely. Recognition that cooperation is not weakness but necessity. This does not mean abandoning strength. It means redefining it. Strength is no longer just military capability. It is adaptability, flexibility, strategic clarity. It is the ability to build systems that others want to be part of, not systems they are forced into. The final question, so we come back to the original question. Can America stop this war? Not easily. Can it walk away? Not without consequences. Can it win outright? Not in the way it traditionally has. That's why this situation is so complex, because every option carries risk. Every path has a cost, and there are no simple solutions. Closing thoughts. What we are seeing is not just a conflict. It is a transition, a shift from one global order to another. And transitions like this are rarely smooth. They are uncertain, unstable, sometimes dangerous. But they also create opportunities. Opportunities to rethink old systems, to build new frameworks, to move toward a more balanced world. The real question is not just what happens next in this war. The real question is, will the decisions made in this moment lead to a more stable future or a more chaotic one? Because the answer to that question will not just shape this conflict. It will shape the world for decades to come. Subscribe for more deep analysis explained in simple English. And tell me in the comments, do you think this situation can stabilize? Or are we heading towards something much bigger? I'll see you in the next video.